everybody. Oh, okay, recording in progress, got it. All right, I apologize. I am a little bit sick. I've got a bit of a cough, so if all of a sudden I mute myself, it's because I'm going to have a coughing fit, and I don't want you to have to hear it. So I'll do my best. I hope my voice lasts, but let's get this show on the road. So today, Dawn has asked me to speak about conflict resolution. Now, most people, when they're do any training, the same things come up: active listening, ask people questions, that kind of thing. So I thought I would try something different for you. So first of all, has anyone ever told a story about themselves when they weren't the hero or the victim? You're telling other people's stories. You tend to be either the hero or the victim. Very rarely are you ever just a lousy person. So, any idea why? It's because we want to save face. We want to look good to other people. So people can relate with the hero and people can relate with the victim. But the lousy person, that just brings judgment. So today we're going to talk about telling stories. So telling stories became crystal clear to me when my children were little. I thought that resolving conflict in the fairest, most efficient way possible was to sit one kid at one side of the table, the other at the other. Now tell me your version, now tell me your version. And I would act as judge and jury and decide who was right and who was wrong and who deserved to be punished. So that's kind of what good parents do, right? That's how we resolve conflict with our kids. But then one day my son looked at me, and he's 2 years younger than my daughter, and he said, "Mom, she's always going to win. She can tell better stories." It was at that very moment that everything in our household changed around conflict, because he was right. She could tell a better story. It was more believable. So she always won. So if saving face is that important, shouldn't we focus on it in conflict? So I teach conflict resolution at Brock University, Lambton College, and in corporate training workshops. Everyone has heard the strategies, active listening, compromise, consensus, and they're all good strategies that you need to know. But if you really want to change the way that you resolve conflict, then you need to look below the surface. In class, I guide my students through a process of deconstructing their perception about conflict, other people, and how they approach conflict, and then reframe it as opportunity. I ask them to challenge their assumptions, their biases, their beliefs, and not only their own, but other people's. Now, what I teach is a full semester, and that involves 36 hours of class time. So obviously I can't bestow all of that wisdom to you today in 20 minutes, but one of the things I noticed teaching conflict was that there's always a theme, and it's always present in conflict. It's saving face. So today I'd like to offer you the theme of let them save face. So saving face can be the cause of the conflict. It can be an approach to solving the conflict, and it can be the solution. So let me show you how. So let's first of all look at saving face as the cause of conflict. So there's three things that often come up: difficult behavior, the dynamic that works, and people think their identity is being attacked. So people do what works for them. It's human nature. We either behave in a way that gets us what we want or avoids what we don't want. And everyone does it. It's human nature. So people with difficult behavior tend to lack conflict. Oh, that one flipped by accident. Tend to lack conflict management skills. So if they're always intimidating and difficult and aggressive, it works for them. Because if it didn't, they wouldn't be doing it. If they act like the victim, and they avoid conflict and they act hurt or offended or any of those other things, they do that because it works for them. So we get into these modes in this dynamic with other people. We've all had the same argument with the same person over and over and over again, almost like a ritual or a routine, because everybody falls into the same pattern. You react, you act, I react, then you react, then you react. And it's very, very predictable. The only way to change that is to make it not work for someone. So they do a behavior because it works. As soon as you make that behavior not work anymore, they'll have to change. So in every interaction, a dynamic's created, whether it's conscious or unconscious. So is your dynamic working for you? Does it get you what you want? Because if it doesn't, or if it's getting you what you want, why would you change? So whatever you want to be, if you want to be right, you want to be better, you want to be superior, you want to be more important, you want things your way, I can guarantee you that what you're doing works for you. Clearly, I have an automatic select thing on this. So now it's time to take your power back by changing the way that you interact with people. So I especially like this quote, and I have to say Dawn attributed it to me on the title slide, and it's not from me, it's actually from a book. The challenge to change a different person, you must first change yourself, your way of thinking about that person, and your way of responding to the familiar provocations. It goes back to changing the dynamic in your relationship and how you resolve conflict. We also really need to look at what difficult means when referring to someone else. Does it mean that that person is not meeting your expectations? So are they being difficult, or are your expectations too difficult? Does the problem lie with the other person, or does the problem lie with your expectations? And the last part of saving face as a cause is consider the role that perception plays in identity. Everyone carries the idea of their own identity. Some say I'm healthy, I'm a good person, I'm a kind person, and others, they are not so healthy, such as the narcissist or the victim mentality. When confronted by something that doesn't align with your own identity, it can feel like you're being attacked or called out. And you need to secure your identity. You need to protect your identity. So sometimes when people get really, really upset, it's something that you've said that they're perceiving as attacking their identity. So identity is a dangerous thing, especially when it's very deeply ingrained singular. So such as I'm a victim. Well, if I'm not a victim, then who am I? So one way to explain it that might resonate with you is the stay-at-home mom. It's not as common now as in the prior generation, but women often didn't work outside the home. They stayed at home with their kids, and they were a mom. I'm a mother. And then when all the kids left, empty nest syndrome happened. Because all of a sudden, when you're not momming, how can you be a mom? And they'd have an identity crisis. So it's very important to remember what people value as their identity, and be sure not to bring it up or attack it, because they'll get very, very aggressive to protect it. Now, the next part is saving face as an approach to conflict. So there's three things that we can do in dealing with conflict to help other people save face. So as I mentioned before, the dynamic that is created between people. So your way is to not make it work anymore. You can create options by asking questions, and the use of objective criteria all help in resolving conflict in order for everyone to save face. So let me explain a bit. In order to stop this natural automatic dynamic that I mentioned earlier, someone needs to act differently. You must deal with the people problems by how you treat people, but keep the real problem in mind and look for ways to test your perspective, your perception, and assumptions, both yours and theirs. So how to stop this is by doing something different. So as you can see by Newton's cradle, once it's put into motion, it becomes automatic. You start arguing in the same way that you've always argued, and the other person's arguing in the same way that they've always argued. And the only way to stop it is to stop that notion. I apologize. I didn't realize there was times on this PowerPoint. So in order to change it, you need to do something different. And yes, it's most likely going to get worse before it gets better. But if you be consistent, you'll interrupt that automatic dynamic. So the next one is when conflict arises, especially in groups, the natural tendency is for you to look for compromise or consensus. There's a belief that there's only one answer, and it lies somewhere between you and me, and we both have to give something up in order to define that singular right answer. But that ends up with watered down solutions nobody's happy with, and it can build a little bit of resentment. And what usually happens is one or the other or both start keeping score. Well, you know what? I gave in to you last time. It's your turn to give in to me. Because, you know, last week I compromised 3 things and now it's your turn. So that's not good conflict resolution for people. You want to look for a win-win. You want to collaborate. And most people think that compromise and collaborate are the same thing, but they're not. Compromise is when we're both giving something up to find the middle ground. Collaborating is looking outside of us at all of these options and then picking the best one or combining more than one to come up with a brand new idea where everybody walks away happy. So my question for you is, if we were going to divide this orange, what's the fairest way to divide it? Because both Emma and Mohammed want the orange and there's only one. How would we make the fairest way to divide it? I'm sure most of you are thinking, well, just cut it in half. Come on, that's pretty simple, Karen. Let's go. Well, yes, we could cut it in half. That would be easy. Then everybody would get a half. But wait a minute. What if we took a few minutes to ask some questions about what each person wants? If we ask Mohammed, he might be like the peel to make zest for a cake he's baking. Emma says she's just hungry and she wants to eat the orange. So now, if we look at what each person wants, we can divide the orange equally, and both people are happier than if they got half. Because Emma would have thrown the peel away, and Mohammed would have thrown the meat of the orange away. So if you take the time to ask questions and look for alternative answers, you're going to get people that walk away with a win-win solution. And the last one is to introduce objective standards or objective criteria. So choosing objective criteria is a really easy way to allow people to save face. Instead of making them wrong, you can blame it on a policy or a rule or a law or a scientific merit. This allows them that they don't have to change their stance. They don't have to say they're wrong. If you come up with some criteria that is enforceable by both of you, then you don't have to lose face. You can still be right. Your mind is changed only by the criteria, not by the other person. So you can use easy things like, well, you know what, that's the company policy, and we both have to agree to the company policy. Or this is our organization's rules. Then it's easy. It's out of our hands, it's the organization. And then everybody gets to save face. So the last one is saving face as a solution to conflict. So there's 3 things in this category: let them be right, and the reciprocity agreement, and save the relationship by showing grace. So this one is a good one. This one really, really resonates with a lot of my students. So when you get into a conflict and you're both holding a position, you can often stop and say, do you want to be right or do you want to solve the problem? And you would not believe how many people say, I want to be right. I want to be right. So they're not even thinking about solving the problem because they're so focused on being right. So let them be right. Give it to them, let them be right. All right, you're right. Good, you're right. Now, can we solve the problem? And it seems like a really simple, silly thing, but it actually changes what's going on in their brain. So now they're not focusing on being right anymore. Now they can put that aside, they know they're right, so let's focus on the problem. And it changes your mind from being stuck into an active problem-solving way. So when we remember that, that is huge because it allows them to save face. And then you don't have to worry about possibly losing face because you're right. It means nothing to me that you're right. What I want to do is solve the problem. And we shift that focus and it allows them to save face. The Reciprocity Agreement, I'm sure you've all heard the rule, one cuts the cake, the other one decides on the piece. If you've ever had children and you have one big piece of cake left and they want some, one cuts it, the other one chooses. So the Reciprocity Agreement is similar to that. So when you're in conflict and you're offering a solution, would you take your own solution? So a good example of this is in divorce court. If any of you are thinking of getting divorced, got a little tip for you here. So in divorce, before deciding who gets custody of the kids or how the money will be split, you need to take on both roles. So this includes deciding visiting rights, deciding responsibilities, roles, support payments, finances. So if the roles were reversed, would you take that offer? So before deciding who gets the kids, set up the custody agreement. So if you flipped a coin, it would still be equal for both people. So would you take your own offer? When you're in conflict and you're proposing a solution to someone else, would you take your own offer? And I have to say, if I had known this before I spent 5 years trying to divorce my ex-husband, I would have saved myself a lot of time, a ton of money, and 5 years of mental exhaustion that I could have spent focusing on my kids. So if you're offering someone something, not if you were in their place, would you take it? If you in your own place would take it. If not, you have to think, are you trying to punish the other person? Or do you think that they're not worthy of an equitable solution? That allows people to save face because it keeps you from offering agreements or solutions that only benefit you. And the last one is save the relationship by showing grace. No judgment. I don't have to prove you wrong or blame you. I can simply allow you an out because I understand the predicament that you might be in. So for example, when you know that someone is late for work, but you get it, they've got kids and they're trying to drop them off from school and they're sick and whatnot, you can say, and you're a manager, you could say, yeah, you know what, you were late today. How are your kids? That must be tough trying to get them out the door. So now you've offered up the excuse so that person can save face. When you do that, it just extends grace. You know that you're giving them the solution. They know that you're extending grace. So everybody knows it. And it just allows you to come off or come out of the conflict with your dignity intact. And oftentimes people know when they're being extended that vine and they're grateful for it, and they will reciprocate by extending grace to you when the roles are reversed. So all of conflict is just stories, because stories are what we tell. They're what we use to get our point. They're used to defend ourselves, and they're used to make you wrong. There's stories that we created either at the moment of the conflict, before it, or oftentimes when we're really young and vulnerable and hurt. We make life decisions in a moment, and that we've spent a lifetime defending them. So memories get altered and modified over the years to make us look better or stronger or weaker or whatever it is we're defending. Remember, because we always tell stories when we're the hero or the victim. So stories are greatly influenced by our past experiences. So how can two people experience the same thing? For example, abuse, and one person deals with it poorly. They let that experience crush them, become an alcoholic or an addict, and other people use it to propel them to success. How can you explain that? It's the story that they tell themselves about what happened. And it's the story that they've maintained and that they've defended and they've projected their whole life. So everybody has a different perspective of things. And some stories incorporate the implicit rules that we learned growing up in our family, in our community, in our culture. We also unconsciously follow the implicit rules that we learned. We apply them to our experiences and emotions, and voila, we have our own personal set of beliefs, values, and perceptions of how the world works. Then we spend our life gathering evidence to confirm our beliefs, and we very, very rarely ever look at information that contradicts our beliefs, because that would cause cognitive dissonance, and we don't know what to do with that. So we stick to information that confirms our lifelong beliefs. And when someone brings something up that it doesn't match that, we defend it. So the moral of the story is be careful of the stories that you tell yourself and others. The end of the I am sentence can have significant influence on how you see yourself and how others see you, and how you cause, approach, and resolve conflict. I'll give you a quick example of my own life. I used to be very heavy when I was younger, and I always thought that people were attacking my weight. I used that weight as an excuse for everything. If I started dating someone and they broke up with me, it's because I was fat. Somebody didn't want to go out with me, it's because I was fat. If I didn't get promoted, it was because I was fat. And that was so deeply ingrained in me. And then I lost weight and I wasn't the fat girl anymore. So I thought that all these men would want to date me now. I'd get all these promotions. I'd do everything that I blamed my weight on, and they didn't happen. I was like, wait a minute. Why aren't they happening? And it was really hard to accept that it wasn't my weight, that maybe it was something else much more vulnerable about myself that was holding me back. So we always like to look at who we are and how much conflict it causes. That caused a lot of conflict because I blamed everything on it. So there's an old saying, there has to be a breakdown before there can be a breakthrough. And sometimes we have to unlearn our perceptions about other people and about ourselves before we can resolve conflict. And this can be very uncomfortable, because often it means challenging your lifelong beliefs and values and your identity. So why is it so hard to understand? It's because people become emotionally committed to their beliefs. And if you're challenging those beliefs, it can feel like an attack. So it's better to do it yourself on your own time than in an argument with someone else, where you become really defensive. So now back to my kids. To the day that everything changed at my house. My son's simple statement of "Mom, she'll always win because she tells better stories," profoundly changed the way that we deal with conflict in our house. My children taught me this lesson, and it's probably the best lesson I've ever learned. We no longer look for blame and punishment. We no longer look for right versus wrong, bad versus good, who did it, who has to fix it. We simply look at how can we fix it and maybe prevent it next time. An example of spilt milk is always a great example. Instead of saying, who spilt the milk? We just say, okay, the milk is spilt. Who's going to clean it up? And then one or the other of them will, because they know they're not going to get in trouble for it. Okay, so how did it happen? Well, I was trying to pour milk with my iPad in my hand. Okay, so maybe not pour milk with the iPad next time. Put the iPad down and then do it? Yeah. So from that moment on, I have not punished my children. We've simply learned from all of our mistakes, because nobody's right, nobody's wrong. It's all about the stories we tell ourselves. So I want my kids' stories that they tell themselves to be, I can fix this. I can figure out how it happened, and I can fix it, and I can most likely prevent it from happening again. And my children, I can biased belief from their mother, but my children are awesome conflict resolutioners. So the next time you're in conflict, remember, it's very important to let the other person save face, because that's really what conflict's all about. And that's all I've got for you. Thank you. And I'm pretty impressed I didn't cough at all.